Tonight, 16 of our nation's most talented prospects gathered in Pittsburgh, each hoping and praying that their name would not be called by the Jets. And speaking of Jets, President Trump is said to be hashing out a deal that would give the U.S. government up to a 90% ownership.
We don't need him. Freedom, freedom. He's a dictator. He's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. I'm a man with great common sense and I'm a smart person.
When late-night television turns into a political battleground, things rarely stay calm for long. But this time, Jimmy Kimmel did not just throw casual jokes into the air. He delivered lines so sharp, they felt less like comedy and more like someone exposing the private thoughts of Washington in real time. One moment, the audience was laughing. The next, it felt like the whole political machine had been unplugged on live television. And when Trump's inner circle entered the conversation, the mood in the room did not just shift, it tightened. So what exactly did Kimmel say that made people laugh first, then suddenly wonder if the joke had gone a little too close to the truth?
Last night, the president said it was highly unlikely he would extend the truce. He said if a deal wasn't reached, Iran was going to be bombed like Kash Patel at the Poodle Room in Vegas. And that line in the sand was reinforced by his tween-age press secretary.
I took my cognitive exam as part of my physical exam, and I got the highest mark, and one of the doctors said, "Sir, I've never seen anybody get that kind of, that was the highest mark." I hope you're happy with that. Although they haven't been bugging me too much to take a cognitive,
But before we go any further, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this is one of those moments you do not want to miss. The strangest part of American politics today is not just the chaos, the scandals, or the headlines that sound like rejected comedy scripts. It is the fact that late-night comedians are starting to sound more investigative than many of the people actually paid to question power.
Spirit Airlines. And who better to own Spirit than the man who ran his own airline into the ground? We're planning to invest $500 million. What is Spirit going to do with 500 men? They have one Economy Plus seat, and it's in the pilot's lap. But Donald Trump needs a miracle. His poll numbers are way down, and I, for one, cannot think of a better way to get Americans to rally around him than spending $500 million of our dollars to save the least popular airline in the history of the planet.
Somewhere between punchlines and monologues, Jimmy Kimmel has slowly become that one person in the room who smiles politely, waits for everyone to relax, and then flips the whole table with one carefully placed sentence.
Said he is suing the Atlantic for $250 million. The Atlantic issued a statement responding to that. They said, "We stand by our reporting on Kash Patel, and we will vigorously defend the Atlantic and our journalists against this meritless lawsuit." Patel claims the allegations are completely false, a hit piece, but the journalist who wrote the story, her name is Sarah Fitzpatrick, says she spoke to more than 24 people, including current and former FBI officials. Her version of the story makes it sound like Patel was blacked out more than the president's name in the Trump-Epstein files.
Because what happened recently was not simply another round of jokes about Donald Trump. It felt more like a public audit dressed up as comedy. The laughter came first, but the realization followed right behind it. By the time the audience caught up, many were left wondering whether they had just heard a joke, a warning, or something sitting uncomfortably between the two.
Wrap to an airline that doesn't even have a life wrap? You know, I flew Spirit recently, and they wouldn't let us off the plane until everyone Venmo'd the pilot for gas money. We have a major development in the Trump-Epstein files. You know how Melania gave that impromptu press conference a couple of weeks ago saying she had nothing to do with Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell? Well, it turns out, at least according to the Daily Beast, that a week after that, Maxwell, who is currently seeking a pardon from Trump, sent a mysterious USB drive to the Department of Justice. The drive was received by Trump appointee.
It started in a way that almost seemed harmless, moving through sports talk, airline jokes, and casual late-night chatter, the kind of setup that makes people lower their guard. There was talk about draft prospects trying to avoid certain teams, which somehow turned into a discussion about airlines, which then somehow landed directly in Trump's orbit. The transition was smooth enough that it almost passed unnoticed, but the point underneath it was sharp. When rumors about government involvement in a struggling airline came up, the punchline did not simply land, it lingered. The idea of someone with a complicated business record stepping in to rescue an airline sounded absurd at first, but the longer it sat in the room, the stranger it became. Then, without warning, the tone shifted. The jokes moved into heavier territory, and suddenly the segment felt less like a comedy bit and more like a mirror being held up to something uncomfortable.
Before, he does not bluff. When he makes a promise, he follows through on it. And I'm not sure why, after 10 years of covering this president, the American media still cannot understand when President Trump says he's going to do something, he's going to do it.
That's right. Said he was going to end the war in Ukraine in one day. He said he's going to release his tax returns, the new health care plan, the wall, Greenland. This is a man whose word is as good as the gold commode he sits on. And
the conversation then moved toward the ongoing whispers around the Epstein files, a subject that continues to return no matter how many times it gets pushed out of the spotlight. Kimmel did not present it like a breaking news report. He treated it more like an unfinished story that everyone in the room already understood, but nobody wanted to finish out loud. He mentioned the timing of statements, denials, and then suddenly, a mysterious USB drive entered the picture, like a thriller detail nobody expected. The humor was still there, but it became thinner, stretched over something far more uneasy. The real point was not only the joke itself, it was the contrast between how aggressively some political figures chase certain investigations while appearing strangely uninterested in others. That contrast became the center of the moment. Kimmel leaned into the imbalance, showing how some files are treated like national emergencies, while others seem to disappear into quiet bureaucratic fog.
Testified before two Senate committees today. He got a grilling from Republicans and Democrats, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, who cut him like a raccoon penis.
He claims that Trump RX has reduced prices by as much as 600%, which I think means companies should be paying you to take their drugs.
President Trump has a different way of calculating. If there's two ways of calculating percentage, if you have a $600 drug and you reduce it to 10, that's a 600%.
Then came the part where satire almost started sounding like prediction. The discussion of a possible pardon was framed less like wild speculation and more like a script people could already imagine playing out. The sequence almost wrote itself. Requests made, hesitation performed, decisions defended, and then a final explanation that somehow leaves the biggest questions unanswered. Kimmel did not directly claim it would happen. He simply described the idea in a way that made it feel disturbingly familiar. And just as the weight of that topic began to settle, the whole scene shifted again. The focus moved toward a high-profile dinner, the kind usually filled with polished speeches, safe jokes, and carefully managed appearances. But this time, even that setting felt different. Reports suggested the evening could become less about humor and more about grievances, more about settling scores than sharing laughs. Kimmel saw the opening and stepped right into it. If the official event was not going to deliver the expected roast, he created his own version, one that asked for no permission and followed none of the usual rules.
Seen here during hour 3 of watching the president eat McRibs. And since it was received, we've heard nothing about it. You remember how interested Republicans were? How much they wanted to get their hands on Hunter Biden's laptop. That is exactly how uninterested they are in seeing this USB drive. Politico's reporting that Republicans on the House Oversight Committee are split on whether Trump should grant Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon in return for her testimony. Democrats are not split on that.
What followed felt less like a regular monologue and more like a full-scale comedic strike, where nobody in the political orbit seemed completely safe. Kimmel stepped into the role of host not as someone trying to please the room, but as someone willing to say what the room would normally avoid. The jokes came quickly, but they were not empty. Each one carried just enough truth to sting before the laughter could fully take over. Trump became the center of the segment, not only as the target of the jokes, but as a symbol of the larger political performance Kimmel was dissecting. The humor touched on ego, image, and the carefully built public persona that has shaped Trump's presence for years. But underneath the jokes was a sharper point. The environment around political comedy has become so sensitive that genuine satire now feels almost dangerous. That alone said more than any direct criticism could. Then Kimmel widened the frame. One by one, figures from Trump's political circle were pulled into the spotlight, each one presented with a mix of humor, commentary, and quiet criticism.
Of course, about 3 hours ago, he went ahead and extended the ceasefire. He wrote, "Statement of President Donald J. Trump. Based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal." Well, you know what? It is Taco Tuesday, so why not?
The names were familiar, and the roles were already known, but the way Kimmel presented them stripped away the usual formality. It became less about titles and more about behavior, less about policy and more about personality. The effect was almost theatrical. Each joke built on the last, creating a rhythm that kept the audience entertained while quietly reinforcing the same larger idea. This was not only about one person. It was about an entire ecosystem. It was about a network of figures whose choices, alliances, contradictions, and public performances created a bigger story. And in Kimmel's version of that story, none of it could be ignored. Even the lighter jokes carried weight. Comments about public image, relationships, and personal dynamics were delivered casually, but they all pointed toward the same theme. In this world, perception often matters more than reality, and controlling the story can become just as powerful as the story itself. By the time Kimmel circled back to Trump, the tone had shifted again, this time towards something more reflective.
You have to understand, President Trump has a different way of calculating from the rest of Who are you going to believe, him or math? Have you ever bankrupted a casino? I don't think so. Now, the actual math is 98%, not 600%, but let's not get caught up in semantics. Let's just be quiet and listen to Robert Kennedy breathe.
Among the many that you described in your testimony. In that context,
beneath the humor, there was a strange acknowledgement. Whether people support Trump or oppose him, his impact on American culture is impossible to deny. Not always in a simple positive or negative way, but in a way that has reshaped conversations, challenged norms, and blurred the line between politics and entertainment. That is where Kimmel made one of his strongest moves. Instead of ending with a direct attack, he wrapped the moment in irony. Trump was not presented only as the subject of sharp jokes, but as part of a much larger cultural question. If comedy is starting to sound this much like political commentary, then what does that say about everything else? And if the people being laughed at are also the people holding power, then who is the joke really on? That question does not just hang in the air for dramatic effect. It changes how everything before it feels. Because once people start wondering who the joke is really on, the laughter begins to sound different.
What Trump is doing right now, it's like if you hired a plumber to install a new toilet, and the plumber tells you it'll only take an hour to put it in, and then there you are 8 weeks later, and you still have a hole in the ground. So you call him, and he says, installation's going great, everything's perfect, ahead of schedule. In fact, he actually finished the job back in March. But as soon as he can get his vice plumber over there to flush it, your bowel movements will go down better than ever before. Definitely better than Joe Biden, okay? CNN reported that they were close to a deal before the week.
At that point, the segment became less about entertainment and more about recognition. It felt like realizing halfway through a story that you already know the ending, but you keep watching because you want to see how far it will go. Kimmel leaned into that discomfort without spelling it out directly. And that is exactly why it worked. The pacing, the structure, and the choice of targets did most of the work for him. Every punchline carried a second meaning. Every callback felt like a reminder that none of this was happening in isolation. The strongest part of the segment was how smoothly it blurred the line between absurdity and reality. One moment, Kimmel was exaggerating political behavior for laughs. The next, the audience realized the exaggeration was barely removed from actual headlines. That tension kept building quietly, like pressure gathering under the surface. And when he started bringing in ideas of loyalty, influence, and political teams, the jokes stopped being only about individuals. They became about systems.
Washington now, we are on week 8 of Trump's little excursion into the Middle East. On Friday, he announced that Iran agreed to everything and that the oil was flowing once again.
This will be a great and brilliant day for the world because Iran has just announced that the Strait of Hormuz is fully open and ready for business and full passage.
Okay, that was
Kimmel painted a picture of a world where loyalty can matter more than accountability, where defending the narrative becomes more important than questioning it, and where belonging to the inner circle can sometimes feel like protection from scrutiny. It was subtle, but it was impossible to miss. He did not directly accuse anyone. Instead, he presented scenarios that felt just believable enough to make people uncomfortable. The idea that decisions could be shaped by personal relationships rather than public interest was not framed like a scandal. It was framed like an open question, something the audience would carry with them after the laughter faded. And just when the moment started becoming too serious, Kimmel pulled it back with another sharp observation, another unexpected comparison, or another piece of irony that tied everything together. Even the smaller lines carried meaning. A joke about public appearances became a comment on image management. A remark about political events became a criticism of performative outrage. A casual mention of internal disagreement hinted at deeper cracks that rarely appear in official statements. Each piece seemed small on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was hard to ignore.
Is dying before our eyes, and no one is doing anything about it. We are on day 9 now of Trump's blockade of the blockade at the Strait of Hormuz. Every day this goes on, the prices go up, and not just on oil and gas. Carix, the world's largest manufacturer of condoms, may have to raise their prices by 20 to 30% because of supply chain issues caused by the war. The price of condoms will affect the Strait of Hormuz and the gays of Hormuz, too.
On the surface, many of the jokes felt light, almost throwaway. But together, they created a pattern that became impossible to overlook. Still, Kimmel never allowed the segment to become too heavy. That balance is what kept everything from collapsing under its own seriousness. Every time the tone moved towards something darker, he pulled it back into humor. He used exaggeration to release the tension, then built it up again. The rhythm almost felt musical, moving between laughter and reflection without fully settling in one place. By the time he reached the final stretch, the message had already landed. What seemed like a playful ending carried a sharper edge underneath. It suggested that sometimes the very things being criticized are also the things being rewarded, celebrated, or at least tolerated. The ending was not clean, and that was exactly the point. The story itself is not clean. It is messy, complicated, and constantly changing, just like the people at the center of it. Kimmel did not try to solve anything. He simply held up a mirror, tilted it slightly, and let the audience decide what they were really looking at.
Triumph, saying the Strait was not open for business, it was closed for business, and that they had in no way agreed to hand over their uranium or any of this stuff. The statement was false, which this is all very, especially for those of us who grew up in the 80s. Did you ever imagine you would be more likely to believe the Ayatollah than the President of the United States? Or that we would be hearing the words.
And maybe that is exactly why the moment hit so strongly. Not because it was the funniest part or even the most controversial, but because it felt strangely familiar. It captured that uncomfortable space where politics and entertainment overlap, where the stakes are real, but the presentation often feels unreal. By the end, the laughter was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer just about the jokes. It was about realizing that the line between satire and reality is becoming thinner every day. Sometimes the only way people can process what is happening is by laughing at it, even when the punchline feels a little too close to real life. And as moments like this fade out, one thing becomes clear without anyone needing to say it directly. If comedy keeps sounding this much like a breakdown of real events, then either comedians are becoming more serious, or the world they are joking about has become too strange to take seriously. Either way, the next time someone walks on stage with a microphone and a smile, it might be worth listening more carefully. Because somewhere between the setup and the punchline, there is often a version of the truth that never makes it into the headlines, but somehow stays with people much longer.